Hello, welcome everybody to today's HR Huddle. Hi, Jen. How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
Good. Welcome to our first huddle in April. And we hope the month has kicked off well for you guys. We're going to continue today with the topic we started last week. We were talking about basically the recruiting topics, and we thought we would do a 3-part series. And last week we talked about sourcing. And today we're going to talk about screening. And then next week we will talk about onboarding. And so we thought we would go into some detail on the screening portion today. And Caroline did a poll for us last week in social media, and we asked, what do you most, want to talk about or maybe struggle with in your screening process? And the topic that rose clearly to the top, and we thought we would start here today, is cultural fit. How do we screen for a cultural fit? And we were just talking before we went live here, and one of our maybe cultural attributes is that we might be a little bit squiggly. When we don't get together very often, or we were talking about a recent sales meeting, and Caroline's new to our team, and we have a lot to update each other on. And so, yes, we're talking about the opportunities. Yes, we get things done, but it is, if anybody's watching it or your first time, participating in it, it is could be hard to follow, or it could be overwhelming, or it could be stressful or irritating. And yet that's, one of the things that, we are over communicators. That's another cultural attribute that we have. And so we have to define for that. And we have to, talk to people about that. But first, we have to define, well, what does cultural fit mean? So we're going to be squiggly, and this is where we're going to start. You might think you start screening and we're going to talk about background checks and reference checks and all of that stuff. We'll get to some of that, we hope. But there's 2 topics we want to make sure we talk about. And the first one is cultural fit. And you have to define it. We have to say, what does our culture look like and feel like? What does it feel like to work here? And we have to define that. And part of how we define it is our values, but also there's other things that we expect from each other. There's ways we operate that we need to convey. We talk a lot about ownership. We have a culture of ownership in our organization. Those of you that follow us or do any work with us, that we talk about ownership quite a bit, and we start that from day one, and we talk about ownership. So I think that's one of the things to look at in your screening process is, are you defining what does culture look like for you? How do you define culture? And is it written down? Are we agreeing on it? And then how do we screen for it, or how do we qualify and convey it to those, but also understand how they're going to fit in? So I have some ideas about that. But Jen, anything else on the setup and defining the cultural fit, or anything else to say on that you want to jump in and add here first?
Well, I mean, just that a lot of people, we're anxious to hire. Okay, people are short staff and they want to hire, and especially experienced hiring, and so we want to jump at the chance to hire. We do. Uh, and so we screen what I'm going to call one-dimensionally. Whatever my kind of hot button is, that's what I'm going to be screening you for. But we have to screen holistically in order to have somebody last. And screening requires patience, which none of us has. And yet we can't take like 40 days on the clock to hire somebody, or they're gone. They took another job. So somehow we have to run this whole thing, with the intention to be thorough and yet, pretty efficient in our screening, which means we have to have screening strategy. And that's what this is about. That's what Tamera and I were thinking, man, we could probably do, like 3 HR huddles on screening strategy. Part of it is recognize you're going to do a technical screen for whatever technical skills you're looking for. And don't hear me like, I know we're in, Tamera and I and our team do business in the accounting profession. So we're thinking, like accounting or tax or audit technical skills, but also it doesn't matter. You could be hiring an office manager. What are the technical skills for that role? Well, what sort of administrative background do they have to have, or what sort of tools do they need to know how to use, or are we looking for HR skills? If you're hiring an HR person, they have technical skills. We want to make sure they have them. So technical skills, and this cultural screen that you're talking about, Tamera, which is fit. We want people to fit. Now, we don't want them to be homogeneous, like we're all identical twins. We want we want diversity. We want collaboration that comes from different perspectives, but we also don't want people to be miserable because they came to work in our culture and it's completely counter to what they desire or what their genetics call for or whatever. So we want to figure out how to make sure they'll fit for a long time and feel like they fit, and we all feel like they fit. That cultural screen. And then there needs to be, a screen for like the business aspects, like, does the salary fit, and does their starting time fit, and what about hours and logistics, where will they work from, and all that kind of stuff. And we find that a lot of people, especially those of you who are smaller firm practitioners, you're a one-dimensional screener. You just sort of have a narrow set of questions and you only have a certain amount of time. And so you don't end up hitting all three of those pillars. And as a result, people come in and then you have sometimes negative surprises as you get going because we didn't screen them well.
Well, we think that what could we have done better to screen, and it's part of it is backing up and say, what are we screening for? And if you look at those three buckets, and Jen, you pointed to this, but somebody needs to be assigned to each one of those. And often we screen on technical, or we screen. Jen was calling it earlier, like, do I like them? Which is not cultural, by the way. That's a different, question. Yes, you would, you want to get along with them. You want to feel like I could work with them, but that is a different question. And then, who is going to screen for that business case? And that can help you set up how many people need to talk to these people and how many interviews. And so how can we combine them as much as possible, have 2 or 3 people, you don't want like this whole board, that's going to be interviewing somebody, because that can feel, overwhelming to them, little not fair. But we also want to make sure that we, know who our assignments are. And so often, Jen and I will, confirm, culture, but also the business side. But we can do a lot of that in the, screening as we go through the interview process. And what does that look like? So I think that's important, for you to define, what is it? And underneath each one of those, I was saying, like under culture, what are the attributes, or what does culture look like here? What do we need to make sure that we are testing for or assessing for, and, figuring out what that looks like and asking then questions about it. And so if I'm screening on culture, I would ask some open-ended questions, or tell me about, scenario-based, questions, so that I can say, how would you handle, different deliverables or emergencies that might come up, or priorities change? Tell me about a situation, how do you handle that? Because we have one that's multitasking, and sometimes what you think your priority is today is not necessarily the priority. We know many of you have that in your environment too, and it can be difficult to address that, or to be able to stop and switch. And so we can figure that out, and you can start to ask those kinds of questions.
Yes. Well, and Tamera, I was just thinking while you were talking about that this idea of questions. I think we all feel like, I know how to ask questions. I know how to do this. And so we aren't that thoughtful in the interview process, like open-ended questions, who, what, when, where, how, why, not closed-ended questions that just get yes, no answers. I know that sounds like, query 101 or something, but we don't tend to ask enough open-ended questions. We also do more talking than we do asking in these interviews often. All of a sudden, that we ask a few questions and they get answering, and then we somehow either like attach to one of their answers and then just take off and tell stories and things, or we start liking them a little and we put on our dancing shoes and accidentally talk our way through the interview, and then we leave and we're no smarter when it's done. So, I always start an interview saying, I have a whole bunch of questions that I want to ask. Some of them I always ask. I ask every candidate I ever meet these questions, and I can't not ask you, because I would feel like, gosh, I have no way of comparing this person to all the other people I've ever met in my screening career. But also I've got questions I don't know I have yet till you start talking. Then I'm going to have new ones. So this could feel a little like an inquisition. And I am sorry if I don't have enough time in this interview for me to do a lot of telling. But if things seem like they're going well with us, I will happily follow up with you. We will have a second conversation or third or whatever's needed. So you can ask me and I can tell you, I can do the telling part. And I don't leave those conversations with no tell, but I try really hard to pull back on my tell reins and try to leave smarter about the person. And when I don't, sometimes I haven't, I get ugly surprises later. They really liked us, but I forgot to find the flaws in them that were going to make them not successful here.
Right.
And anyway, so that's something to pay attention to too.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And I think part of, a way to convey or figure out how people are going to fit in culturally is some assessments. Now, I know you often think about assessments technically. So let's talk about assessments for a minute. We can tie it to culture and then we can talk about maybe some other ones. Because I know one of them that we use is personality assessments. And we use Myers-Briggs. And, Myers-Briggs says we are not using this assessment to say whether or not you should hire them or not. That's not the intention of this particular, personality assessment. I know there's some out there that do that. But how we do it is to say, how are they going to fit into how we work? One example is we're a 100% remote business. And even before the pandemic, we would screen and qualify if you're a high extrovert and you're over there working by yourself alone in your office before we all had shelter mates. That could be a little bit draining for an extrovert because they don't have a lot of people to talk to. Now, if they're moderating or if they're doing a lot of coaching, like we're on the phone all day long, we do not experience that, Jen and I in particular, but some of our team members could because they're over there by themselves and need to have that kind of experience. So we would qualify on that and, ask, how do they, how are they fed socially and, how would that work and have they worked remote, those kinds of things. But that's one of the ways that we use personality assessments. And then also, how do they fit in based on, attention to detail, which those assessments tell us. It tells us about, are they feeling versus thinking? And, how would a feeler fit with a couple of leaders that are thinkers and, pretty, straight the way it is. We like to say we're a drama-free zone. We don't want anything between us. And so if there is something, we're going to talk about it. So how do you receive feedback? So that would be an open-ended question we would ask, but we could have some insight on that. And where to probe some of those questions Jen was talking about based on personality assessment. So that is one of the assessments we definitely use. And it is more culture based and then team orientation than it is skill set.
We also use skills assessments, and we've created them ourselves because they're specific to things we do. And that we try not to make them like super hard, but we also make them hard enough that it's very likely that candidates will make some errors and they might need some clarifying directions. And it's a little bit of a test drive of how it would be to do a project with them. Although it's not a long project, it's a short project. If they turn it around, lickety split, no questions, no clarifying, and it's perfect, we're all like astounded. And that's super rare, by the way. Maybe never has happened. I'm not sure. But usually it's full of errors and they didn't ask any clarifying questions. And then you're like, that's an interesting thing about this person. And we make it very clear. We expect you're probably going to have a few questions. Don't hesitate. Here's who you'll ask and how to get your questions answered. So we try to set it up, but they're an independent operator, but not asking for help. And then
right.
Maybe suffering a little bit from that. Now, is that a disqualifier? Not necessarily, but it's just a data point, and we're going to pay attention to it. If they asked 1,000 questions, they sent 60 emails or something, all one-liners, all one question at a time as they came up, that would be an interesting finding as well. And we would be very disturbed by that probably, because we have such a mammoth email news feed, as we call it, that it would just be terrible if that's how they process their questions. So just be interesting, things like that. And so we've created a variety of different assessments depending upon the role. And once you create them, you can kind of update them lightly if you have to replace that role or add an additional person in that role. And that's been very helpful. There are accounting assessments and that sort of thing. And I was thinking, Tamera, I'm not really sure the best way to supply this. Maybe we just ask people to message us in social media and we have screening resources in the back of our PowerPoints when we teach HR recruiting and that sort of thing, including some of these assessment ideas that we have become aware of. And so happily share those resources with you if you let us know that you want them. You could comment here too if you're watching us live. And as long as we know who you are, hopefully we can hunt you down with your email address and get you those resources. And you can DM us or whatever's comfortable, but let us know if you want those.
Yes, for sure. And I think part of that assessment is, and this is probably covers a little bit culture and technical, but I think sometimes we make the mistake of knowing what somebody does or how they're going to operate and their technical background based on a title. And I think we've all experienced a manager is not a manager in every single firm across the country, or a staff person, or we've got different titles, or even like the office coordinator. We've been hiring some operations and marketing and program coordination. Well, gosh, we found out, program coordination or program management gave us all kinds of resumes that we had to figure out how to narrow, that process just on the posting side, but then also on the screening, because it means something different to everybody. And so we have to define what that is. And especially for our experienced hire recruiting, we have to stop and find a way to understand what did they do as a manager. Because we go in making assumptions about that. And so that skills assessment, I think, is a good place. If there's things that you expect a manager to do, is there a way that they could demonstrate that? Or what kind of scenario-based questions could you ask that could have them demonstrate that? Or from a people management at the manager level to, continue that train of thought, what does that look like? Feedback, performance reviews, and they could tell you about those things. But that's a place to, put in some assessments. And we might think, gosh, I shouldn't have to do that with an experienced hire, but we're making up what it means. And then they come in and we've placed them wrong, or we're not onboarding them correctly, which we'll talk about next week. And we're frustrated. And it's because we didn't screen it up front in the beginning. So.
Right. Well, okay. So something else that astounds me, Tamera, is that, sometimes we hear about people struggling with a new hire, and they seem like they screened them well. They felt like their interview process worked, but they didn't check references.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people say to us when we say, "Have you checked references?" They say, "Oh, why bother? I mean, they're only going to give you the dates of employment, and they're only going to give you the title, and nobody tells anybody anything." And we would say, "Huh. That's not our experience. You must not be asking the questions the right way." We always ask for references that are superior to the person. That's the first thing. Sometimes people will give us peer references or subordinate references or client references, which is okay. I mean, one client reference would be fine, but we want to talk to people who managed you in the past. And then, we have a way of asking our questions that we usually get people to open up and tell us about that person. And one thing about it is, if your references really love you and think you're awesome, they usually feel really good about telling the story of you.
Right.
And they will tell the story. And if they're super guarded and they're going, dates of employment only, title only.
Red flag.
Yeah. We go, that feels sketchy. And it doesn't mean that it's an automatic disqualifier, but it just doesn't feel right fully. And maybe one employer, because they work at the Pentagon or something, won't give us the details, but the next employer, if they give us 2 or 3 references, we usually will get 2 of the 3 to tell us the story. And that's helpful. Not checking references feels really risky to us. And even if all they do is confirm the title and the dates of employment, at least if it matches the resume, you have a good sense as to whether or not, you really are dealing with somebody who's being very specific and honest in their details. The other thing is that some recommend that you have the candidate complete an application for employment, either an online application or a form, which we can't fathom, but and that application serves, it has a signature block area that says, I certify that the information contained in this application is true. Because I think most of us know that resumes, you can't necessarily hold them accountable for the honesty of the resume. And so that's another place to look. And then the last thing, Tamara, that I wanted to say about this whole reference check is that some roles, and I would imagine like accounting roles where people are going to have access to socials and maybe in the client accounting side, bank accounts, the background check that includes, criminal record, maybe even a drug screen. I mean, some firms do those things. And so, of course, drug screens these days with legalized marijuana in some states is super hard to do, and navigate that. We get it. But, we're not opposed to those things as long as they are explained up front to the candidates and they understand the reason that we have those in place.
And consistent.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. They have
to. You have to be consistent across the board with how we do that. 100%.
Agreed.
I think one other, screening tool that, just to mention here before we wrap up is a very, very scientific one and it's called your gut. And we need to listen to our gut or the hairs that are crawling up on the back of our neck or silence. Jen and I had some silence in our recruiting process last year. And we were like, so what'd you think? What'd you think? And, both of us were not saying anything because we were like, I have concerns. We couldn't put our finger on it. But once we started talking through it, we started to identify what it was. But because we couldn't put our finger on it, we couldn't really articulate it. There was silence, and that was a flag. That was like, okay, we need to stop and talk about that. And we really wanted to hire somebody, and we actually really wanted to like this person. And we did like this person. So that goes back to my liking where I kind of started here. We liked this person a lot, but was not a fit for our job. And that would not have been fair to this person or to us. And so we have to listen to our gut. And we know this, we teach on it, we coach on it. And sometimes we want to ignore that. And, or somebody on our team has a huge red flag and we'll be like, no, it's fine. It'll be fine. And they're like, no, it will not be fine. We have to stop and pause and really explore what that is. So I think that's the other thing from a screening perspective is, we want to push through. We are so desperate for people. And sometimes we even really like the people, but that is not the reason to hire somebody.
So hiring is a little bit like getting married. I was just thinking that, Tamara, you go out on a date with somebody and you like them, awesome, great, but are you going to grow old with them? Are you going to share bank accounts with them? Are you going to have, kids that you raise together? And yes, employment's not exactly like that, but we have clients that we share together. We have new projects and new programs that we devise and develop together and collaborate on and learn together and build something together. And we have to keep that thing sustained and alive. And we have to know that we could do those things for the long haul. And it doesn't have to be for the, like till the gold watch or whatever that is, retirement. But it needs to be long enough that it makes sense to make the investment on onboarding, which we're going to talk about next HR Huddle. That's a mammoth investment. And so liking isn't enough and being desperate isn't enough. I saw tax Twitter hashtag, you're the inspiration for this series because you guys were all talking out there about hiring and there was a debate, hire slow, fire fast, or just hire fast, fire fast, and I was like, I think I would be doing a lot more firing if I hire fast. So I said to Tamera, I think we should get out there and say, hire thoughtfully, maybe not slow because efficiency matters, but man, I'd rather walk away from a candidate I was uncertain of than wrap ourselves up in them and get my whole team. It's a little bit like you're bringing home a baby from the hospital or something. And you say, look at our beautiful new baby, team members. And they all buy in and we all get invested. And then that person doesn't work out. Everybody's so sad and hurt by it. It's just not worth it. So screen.
And they shake their head like, what are we doing? Why are we doing this? So yes, it's very important. We want to take the time. And I think that's the last thing I'll just say here to wrap up is that we want to make sure we articulate what the process is for our screening. so that the candidate knows, how many interviews, who will they be meeting with, what's the time to expect in between, because they've got other opportunities also, and they need to be able to plan. But if they don't know and it just feels like one more thing, or they're waiting, we're not doing a good job of managing expectations. And that's conveying our culture, by the way. So, and what it's going to be like to work with us. So think about that too in our communications, in your screening. We think we have to sell and tell a whole bunch, but part of how we're operating in the screening process will tell that candidate what it's going to be like to work with us too. So, but we'd love to know your thoughts. We do have resources. If you're interested, let us know. And next week, we will continue on this topic and talk about onboarding. So have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next Monday. Thank you very much.
Bye.